Hello, my name is Laura, and today I'm going to share with you my hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome story. I'm going to cover some of my early symptoms as a child, what eventually made me think that something must be wrong with my body, how I finally got diagnosed, and how I'm managing my symptoms today. Let's get started. My childhood was actually pretty normal, and there were very few signs of something wrong. But of course, knowing what I know now, in hindsight, there were a few subtle hints. When I was 2 or 3 years old, I fell backwards in a kitchen chair and tried to grab the chair next to me to keep myself from falling, and I took that chair down with me, which landed on my right arm, dislocating my shoulder and elbow, giving me a few hairline fractures as well. My mom also tells me that I would often complain of leg pains as a child, especially at night, which doctors told her was normal growing pains. I also had this reoccurring chest pain that I would get multiple times a year, which was a really sharp stabbing pain in the left side of my chest, and it made it impossible to take a deep breath. It would only happen when I was relaxing and not really doing anything, and would usually last for a few hours before going away on its own. I never did find the cause of the pain, but luckily it slowly started to happen less and less, and now it's been several years since I've experienced it. I remember having a few problems in school, like trouble holding my pencil correctly because the right way was very painful. I still hold it wrong, in fact. I also couldn't hold my arm up for very long to ask a question. I would have to support it with my other arm. I had super overcrowded teeth, too. I had to have 2 sets of braces to correct for it, and I had 8 molars pulled because there just wasn't enough room in my mouth for all of my teeth. I also had really poor nearsightedness. I don't remember what my correction was, but I knew that I couldn't recognize people past a few feet in front of me. I had LASIK surgery to correct for it in my early 20s, but I'm back to wearing glasses most of the time because my vision got worse again. I did and still do have easy bruising, but it was nothing so unusual that I ever saw a doctor about it. I was definitely super bendy growing up, and I enjoyed the attention I got when I did party tricks like the splits, putting my foot behind my head, and contorting my fingers into funny shapes. My extreme bendiness was my only claim to fame in PE class growing up because I was pretty awful at nearly every sport I tried. I was very scrawny and weak, essentially just skin and bones, and also pretty uncoordinated, like can't run and dribble a basketball at the same time uncoordinated. During stretching time in PE class, I was always the best by a mile. My high school strength and fitness teacher even nicknamed me Gumby. If you're old enough, you might remember that cartoon. I remember being a bit frustrated by that sit and reach contraption because even though I was insanely bendy, my hamstrings were always really tight, so I was only a little above average with the sit and reach score for the presidential fitness test. When I hit puberty around age 12, I started experiencing POTS-like symptoms. POTS stands for postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and it's extremely common with hEDS. It's when your heart rate increases drastically, specifically greater than 30 beats per minute, when you go from flat to upright in body position, and you get symptoms like dizziness, vision loss, nausea, heart palpitations, headaches, and even fainting. I quickly figured out how to avoid the worst of the symptoms by simply moving more slowly when getting up after laying or sitting for extended periods of time, and not bending over to reach things and squatting down instead. And to also be really careful in hot and humid weather or when getting out of the shower or a hot bath. Since I never fainted and felt like I had those symptoms mostly under control, I didn't complain much and never saw a doctor about it. I remember growing up getting a lot more sore than my peers after conditioning in sports and PE class, but I always chalked that up to being a lot thinner and weaker than my peers. I also remember my coaches and PE teachers saying that I had such an advantage being flexible because I should get hurt less often, but I seemed to get hurt more often than everyone else, and again, I chalked that off to being thinner and weaker than everyone else. And when I would get hurt, there was rarely an actual mechanism of injury. Things would just hurt. And things that would hurt other people, like rolling their ankles, for example, didn't hurt me. It was very strange. In high school, I was diagnosed with Raynaud's syndrome, which is when the arteries in your hands and feet, and sometimes also the ears and nose, inappropriately constrict in response to cold, cutting off blood flow to the fingers and toes, turning them white or purple. It's a little painful and annoying to experience, so I'm glad I've mostly grown out of that. In college, I became more active and started jogging long distances on my own outdoors, and I joined a few martial arts schools over the years. That started out pretty well. I had excellent endurance and could run for hours, even though I had always been a really slow runner. I loved just popping in my earbuds and losing myself in the music and the rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement. I definitely also enjoyed the runner's high that I got if I ran continuously for over an hour. Martial arts proved to be the one sport that I was actually somewhat good at, and I absolutely loved that time in my life. I have many medals and trophies from past tournaments, and I also met my best friend at the second martial arts academy that I attended. I initially had to quit martial arts temporarily when I dislocated my left shoulder at the age of 22. I won't go into too much detail about the dislocation, but it was a non-traumatic injury, and my shoulder just kind of grinded a bit, and then there was a pop, and it was out. It was a very surreal experience because while I could look in the mirror and clearly see that my shoulder was out, I was quite thin at the time, and so it was very obvious that my humeral head was forward and down, but I wasn't in nearly as much pain as I would have expected. I couldn't move my arm, and it was a little bit painful, but it wasn't that bad. Since I wasn't in any sort of extreme pain, and I was a starving college student, I had just finished a 4-year X-ray program and was currently in nuclear medicine school, I decided, very stupidly, don't try this at home folks, not to go see a doctor and to just watch a how-to YouTube video and reduce the dislocation myself. After a few quite painful tries, I got it back in place, and it took about 4 months after that for my shoulder to feel back to normal. At age 23, I finished school and moved to a new town to start my career. Almost immediately after the move, I started getting migraines a couple times a week, and I knew that they were migraines because they felt completely different from every other headache I'd ever experienced in the past. Since both my mom and dad both get migraines fairly often, I wasn't too concerned about it and didn't bother to see a doctor, especially since they always went away after a few hours, and they only seemed to happen in the evenings when I was already home from work, so they weren't affecting my life too terribly. Around the same age, and after my shoulder was completely healed, I started taking extreme kickboxing classes. During one of those classes, we were doing this ground and pound exercise, and during that exercise, I developed an instant throbbing headache at the base of my skull. So I stopped going, and that headache lasted for a month before I finally decided it was time to see a doctor. He ordered a CT scan, and by the time my insurance approved that scan, the headache had disappeared on its own, so I didn't follow up with the scan. At age 24, I woke up one morning and had this bone-deep pain in the arch of my right foot. I figured maybe I was jogging a bit too much and had somehow gotten a stress fracture, so I stopped jogging and focused on Pilates and weight training to stay active instead. After over a year without any improvement in my foot, I broke down and saw an orthopedic doctor and got some x-rays. The x-rays showed a bone cyst on my navicular bone, as well as some degeneration in the adjacent joints and falling arches. Because of the erosive appearance of the cyst and because I have psoriasis, he suspected I may be developing psoriatic arthritis since there was never an actual physical injury to my foot, and regular bone cysts are typically painless. My psoriasis is extremely mild, by the way. I have guttate, not plaque psoriasis. It's so mild, in fact, that I wouldn't know that I even have it if it wasn't for a biopsy. And I don't do anything to treat it since it doesn't really affect me in any sort of negative way. So the orthopedic doctor fits me for custom orthotics and refers me to a rheumatologist. At this point, I started to develop daily musculoskeletal pain in very random areas all over my body, sometimes in the joints and sometimes in the middle of an arm or a leg, and it could last for minutes to hours to even days, and was anywhere from a really mild ache to a sharp, intense pain. The rheumatologist orders lots of imaging as well as blood tests to rule out rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, even some nasty STDs, among other things that could possibly be causing the symptoms I was having. Everything comes back negative, and he suspects that it's just early psoriatic arthritis, since it's diagnosed clinically and not through any imaging or blood tests. I was a little bit skeptic about this diagnosis since I was quite young, had extremely mild psoriasis, and had never had any swelling or redness in the joints when they hurt. But this doctor believed me when I told him that I had all of this pain for no apparent reason, and he was willing to help me. So I kept seeing him for several years, and we tried a lot of different things to help manage my pain, mostly with little to no improvement, but my pain wasn't too severe, and it didn't affect my daily life in too much of a negative way most of the time, so I wasn't too concerned about it and had kind of just learned to live with it at this point. As my foot pain decreased, just hurting every once in a while, I tried to take up jogging again several more times, but had to quit eventually since the pain would always get worse the more I ran. Around age 25, I started to get hives and swelling on a daily basis, and the hives and areas of swelling would appear in random parts of my body at random times during the day and night. I tried changing all of my soaps and detergents to hypoallergenic brands and attempted to do a food elimination diet since sometimes the swelling would appear after eating. When nothing worked, I saw an allergist who tested me for all of the common food and environmental allergies, and it all came back negative. He said he could keep testing me for the more rare allergies, but that he couldn't guarantee that he would find the allergy, and it might prove to be a waste of time and money. I agreed, especially since I had to stay off of allergy medication for the tests, and that was a pretty miserable experience. He told me to just take Allegra D once a day, carry an EpiPen, and take Benadryl as needed for any breakthrough symptoms. For 6 months, I had hives and swelling every single day. It usually appeared a couple hours before I was due for my next Allegra D pill, and I would just then take liquid Benadryl to calm it down. After that 6-month period, the symptoms just seemed to magically disappear altogether with no changes in my lifestyle, and I was able to stop taking allergy medication, but I still carry an EpiPen just in case. If I had heard of mast cell activation syndrome at the time, I would have asked to be tested for it since it's very common with EDS. At age 27, I got engaged to my now husband, and I moved back to our hometown. After moving back home, my migraines reduced significantly from a couple migraines a week to a couple a year. I sometimes wonder if there wasn't some sort of environmental trigger in my previous town that I was living in, since the migraines only started when I moved there and all but disappeared when I moved away. Once I was settled in my hometown with my fiance, I started working at a very busy hospital with an hour-long commute each way and 10-hour shifts that often turned into 11 or 12, and my previous foot pain came back with a vengeance. It got to a point where I would limp constantly and had trouble sleeping because it would throb painfully throughout the night. I saw my primary care provider and got a walking boot and a referral to a podiatrist. At the appointment with the podiatrist, she did a very thorough physical exam of my foot and ankle, feeling around the bones in my foot and moving it around every which direction. She got a curious look on her face while she was doing this and started manipulating my knee and hip as well. She then asked if I could touch my thumb to my wrist, demonstrating with her own thumb about 2 inches from her wrist. So I tried, and I could flatten my thumb to my wrist without any problems or pain. She says that my pain is likely coming from an inflamed tendon due to the laxity in my foot and ankle. She explains that people can develop laxity in a joint after an injury to that specific joint, but that some people are just born with joint laxity in their entire body, and that she suspects this is the case with me. She recommends I start wearing better shoes, especially at work, preferably motion control shoes to keep my feet more stable. She hooks me up with some aggressive orthotics and a flexible ankle brace to help stabilize my ankle instead of the walking boot to use as needed. She also refers me to physical therapy to help strengthen the muscles of my feet and ankles to help counteract the laxity. I left the appointment feeling very encouraged because it seemed like I was finally on the right track to healing my foot after years of issues. As soon as I got home, I Googled what can cause a person to be born with joint laxity, because while I had heard of the term in my career as an X-ray tech, I always thought it was caused by injuries, and I didn't realize you could just be lax everywhere naturally. I had always thought I was just naturally very flexible. I didn't know that I was hypermobile. During that Google search, an article about hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome came up, and as I kept reading, the article started to sound like my autobiography. This was a big aha moment for me. It occurred to me that hEDS could also explain all of my mother's health issues, which were similar to my own but significantly more severe. So I called my mom and I explained my suspicions of us both having hEDS, and she agreed that it was definitely possible. My mom, who lives many states away from me, brought it up with her doctor and was able to be seen by a specialist about a month or 2 later and got officially diagnosed with hEDS. I talked to my doctor and was able to get a referral to see a geneticist and was scheduled for that appointment in 9 months' time. During that 9-month wait, the reflux and frequent burping that I had experienced for several years at this point started to get significantly worse, to the point where I might burp 10 times in a single minute, and my stomach contents would often come back up with those burps. So I went back to my doctor for help, and she referred me to get an EGD done by a general surgeon. So I go see the surgeon and get the EGD done, and it showed some inflammation in my esophagus due to the reflux. The surgeon had me start taking over-the-counter antacid to help with the reflux. I still experienced the reflux and excessive burping, but it rarely burned anymore, so that was a huge plus. All was well for a few months, and then I developed a new concerning symptom, this strange and somewhat painful squeezing and tugging sensation in my throat and chest that would last for hours after every single meal. The sensation also made me feel quite short of breath, which was really disconcerting. So I went back to the surgeon, and she wanted to refer me to a gastroenterologist, but said that I needed to try a 6-week low FODMAP diet before she would refer me. I let her know that literally all food and drink were causing my symptoms, even water, and that I was going to be evaluated for hEDS soon, that my mother was already officially diagnosed, and that I suspected that I was experiencing a motility issue with my esophagus, not a food sensitivity. She essentially shut me down and said that motility issues aren't seen in young people, and that the diet was all she could offer to help me, and she wouldn't put in the referral unless the diet didn't help after 6 weeks. So I started the diet, and in the meantime, I called my local clinic to make an appointment with my primary care provider because I was desperate to have some relief. I couldn't wait 6 weeks. I ended up getting an appointment with a doctor that I hadn't been to before because my primary care provider was on vacation. So I told this new doctor about my symptoms and that I felt like it might be a motility issue in my esophagus and explained about the possibility of me having hEDS. She didn't bat an eye and agreed that I might be right and referred me to a gastroenterologist right away. Since it was going to be a while until I could see that GI doctor, she researched some information on medications to treat esophageal dysmotility in the meantime. So she had me try taking a medication called diltiazem with every meal, which is a drug usually prescribed for high blood pressure and AFib, but has been used in the past to treat esophageal dysmotility as well. Essentially, diltiazem works by relaxing the muscles of the esophagus so that it doesn't inappropriately contract or spasm during or after swallowing. The doctor warned me that the drug could possibly make me dizzy or pass out, since it also affects the muscles of the heart and lowers blood pressure and heart rate, and my blood pressure was already on the low side. I was honestly pretty nervous to take the medication since I already had problems with dizziness and vision loss on a daily basis, but I was willing to try anything at this point to get some relief. Diltiazem ended up being a miracle drug of sorts for me. It completely solved my throat and chest pain after eating, and it also had a rather surprising side effect. The dizziness and vision loss I had experienced every day since I was 12 almost completely disappeared. I suspect that it had something to do with the fact that diltiazem lowers your heart rate, and mine used to skyrocket whenever I would stand up quickly, causing those symptoms. But with diltiazem, it stays pretty steady all the time. Long after I had finished the 6-week low FODMAP diet, which didn't improve any of my GI symptoms, of course, I was able to see the GI doctor. He ended up doing an esophageal manometry test with a 24-hour pH test, which was positive for diffuse esophageal dysmotility and GERD. He also had to repeat the EGD because the surgeon didn't do the proper amount and type of biopsies to test for eosinophilic esophagitis, which is a very common problem with people with hEDS and Raynaud's. This test came back negative. He kept me on the diltiazem since it was working so well and had me start a prescription proton pump inhibitor to help reduce the stomach acid that I was producing. Before I knew it, it was March of 2021 and time for my genetics appointment. I was evaluated over a 2-hour-long, very in-depth and thorough examination and given a tentative diagnosis of hEDS pending some genetic testing to rule out the other subtypes of EDS, as well as some other genetic connective tissue disorders. When those results came back negative about a month and a half later in May, I was officially diagnosed at the age of 30 with hEDS. After the diagnosis, I was referred to physical therapy to help address the hypermobility in my entire body and not just my feet and ankles. I also received an ultrasound of my heart to make sure that everything was normal there, which it thankfully was. I also finally addressed some concerning pelvic floor issues that I had experienced since my early 20s, and hopefully the treatment that I've received since then will help delay or eliminate the need for surgery in the future. I'm currently 32 years old, and the vast majority of my hEDS symptoms are well controlled through medication and at-home physical therapy. I manage my musculoskeletal pain mostly with heat therapy, compression, and bracing. I typically only take pain medication for migraines and headaches, and that's usually just ibuprofen or Excedrin. I feel very fortunate that hEDS has not been debilitating for me so far. I have a full-time career as a radiology tech. I stay fairly active at home. I socialize with my friends. I travel. I have a fantastic marriage, and I even have the time and energy to pursue this YouTube hobby. I have many things to be thankful for. I'm especially thankful for the podiatrist that first noticed my hypermobility, because without her discovery, I would probably still have never heard of hEDS and would still be trying to make sense of my random issues. I think that about covers my hEDS story, so I'll leave you with this phrase: if you can't connect the issues, think connective tissues. What was your aha moment in your EDS story? Let me know down in the comment section below. If you like what I'm doing with this channel, the easiest way to show support is to like, subscribe, comment, and share. That will help these videos reach more people. As always, thanks for watching and see you next time.